when I played a little bit of Bold on Lichess, I felt that when I was making the moves, less time was being used. So I felt that if I could translate that to where I'm making the moves and it feels like less time is being used, then chess.com is going to be the same amount of time, but it's going to be a lot slower, and I'll be able to budget my time better. Hope you guys enjoyed the match that we just played against Wesley So in the finals. So we're gonna do a little bit of analysis. Obviously the match for the most part was never really in doubt. Once I got off to a very fast start, it kind of felt like Wesley wasn't ever really to turn it around, unfortunately. So before we jump right into the analysis, I did want to add one thing. So Wesley gives me way too much credit when he says that I was looking at his matches really closely or watching them. I actually was not watching the matches. I just happened to recall that when Wesley was playing Jeffrey, I saw a tweet from chess.com about that match, and how Jeffrey started really fast or got a big score, and then Wesley came all the way back. So Wesley's giving me a little bit too much credit. The other thing I want to add is I want to add that in terms of the match against Nihal, I didn't watch it super closely, but what was sort of a telltale sign for me was that in the first game against Nihal, I believe it was this Aliyekin's defense. It was d4 d6 knight f3. I believe it was takes g6 bishop c4. Nihal played bishop g7, and Wesley sacked on f7, played queen f3, and after king e6, queen e4, king f6, he would go on to win this game after a very long struggle, but he didn't win the game immediately the way that I thought he should have. So I remember seeing this first game against Nihal and then a couple other games which were a little bit tricky for him to win, and so that was sort of the thesis or the basis for what I was referring to when I spoke about him getting off to slow starts. He's giving me way too much credit, thinking that somehow I was watching all the matches from beginning to end. At any rate, it is what it is, you guys. So we're going to jump right on into our analysis. We're going to start with game number 1, and this game was really important because I think this was sort of symbolic of the entire match. So I started knight f3. Wesley played c5. Now I was kind of surprised because in past years Wesley has generally tried to be a lot more solid. He's played a lot of like d5 e6. Instead he chose to play c5, and much like the match last year, kind of Wesley tried to play the Sicilian setups, but it just didn't really work out, unlike the previous years. So d6, I go bishop b5 check, goes bishop d7, we trade the bishops on d7, I castle here, knight f6, rook e1, knight c6, all very standard, by the way. Now e5 is another move here. Hikaru Nakamura played it in the 2015 FIDE Grand Prix in Tashkent when he beat Boris Gelfand in a 7-hour game to qualify for the FIDE Candidates Tournament in 2016. So Hikaru has played this e5 move a lot, but in this situation I chose not to do that. I chose to play rook e1. So knight c6 is played here. I play c3, e6. Now I play d3, and this is not a line that is considered to be very dangerous, but I sort of drew on some inspiration from many years ago. So probably about 16 to 17 years ago, when I was a lot younger, obviously not as strong as I am today, I would play a lot of knight or setups, and there was this one guy both on the Internet Chess Club and later on Play Chess, the chess-based site, and he went by the username, I think obviously this is also his name, but it was this guy Dusan Popovic from, I believe, Serbia or Croatia. I'm not 100% sure which country is from, but he would always play this d3 knight d2 knight f1 knight g3. So I did not actually prepare this ahead of the match. I just decided to play it because I recalled the inspiration on the spot, and I played this knight f1 knight g3. I did not prepare this ahead of the match, just to be very clear. Okay, so I play knight g3, he goes b5, and now I play d4. Now you're probably wondering, well, why did I do this whole knight maneuver before playing d4 right away? Now the reason I did it before playing d4 right away is that if I go d4, black can trade on d4, play d5, e5, and then black can go knight e4. So it's similar, but with the knight on g3 you always stop this idea of d5 and knight e4. So instead I play knight b d2 here, rook c8, knight f1, castles, knight g3. So d5 is played, I go d4. And now again, as I said, the computer doesn't actually evaluate this as being all that special for white, but I just remember that when I had to face it many years ago, I was not super thrilled by the position. So he trades on d4, and he does go d5 here. Now this sort of was a sign to me that Wesley was not super fresh at the start, because even though this is one way of playing it here by sacking the pawn for counterplay, objectively this is not great. And so I had a feeling when Wesley did this, he was a little bit off at the beginning. So queen d5 is played here, and now I play rook to g4. Now Wesley plays king h8 here. Important move. Of course, if you play something like knight b4, I can just go bishop h6 and put pressure on g7. If you push the pawn, I just simply take the rook. And so you kind of have to sidestep with king h8. Another way to play would be like rook fd8, but after bishop h6, bishop f8, I think after, I don't know, if h4, queen d2, one of these moves, white should still be quite a bit better. So king h8 was played. So now I play bishop to g5 here. Idea is try to trade some bishops and maybe get some attacks here. So Wesley takes on g5. I play knight takes g5, and Wesley plays h6 correctly. And this is where I played a bad move, and it was based more or less on a miscalculation. I chose to play knight to h3. Now initially I was going to go knight f3, and I thought, okay, I'm just up a pawn, small advantage, should be fine. Actually, computer says it's okay for black though, which is kind of interesting. So I go knight h3, plays rook d8, go knight f4. If black takes the pawn with the queen, which is a very natural move, I go knight g6 check, creating a discovered attack on the queen. Pawn takes knight, rook takes queen, and after rook takes rook, probably queen e2. White is better. It's not clearly winning, but I assume long term, especially in a blitz game with all these weaknesses everywhere, like rook d5, rook c1. I mean, it feels like after rook c7, too many weaknesses, and it should be winning for white. All right, so let's go back. So here queen d7 is played by Wesley instead. So now I go queen to d3, and this is really the microcosm of the whole match. And it's really was important because I didn't like my position. I was down on the clock here. I think it was about 2 minutes to 40 seconds, and so I was behind on the clock, and I felt like maybe I have some chances like knight h5. I'll give a sample line for you guys to see something like knight d4, rook g7, knight f5, and then I have rook h7 check. And after takes, I go knight f6 check, forking the king and the queen. However, after knight h5, rook g8, it's very hard to come up with a plan for white here, and most importantly, I was down on time at this point in the game. So because I'm down on time here with no clear plan, 2 minutes to 30 seconds, Wesley probably will convert this. So instead I play queen to d3 here, and now Wesley plays knight takes e5. Now again, objectively knight takes d4 is better, but knight e5 is also a very logical move because it simplifies the position. But after knight e5 takes, we trade the queens, and I go a4, and I offered Wesley a draw here because we're headed for an endgame that will be drawn. It's pretty flat here. Black can maybe go rook d5, but after I play a takes b5, rook takes e5, I just play a move like h3, rook takes b5, rook a7, rook b2, and after a move like rook c4 followed by rook c7, black is up a pawn. It's 4 pawns versus 3, but at the top level in chess, this should be a draw. So I offered a draw and Wesley took it, and this was the first example, and this occurred more or less throughout the whole match, where when I was in trouble, I found the right decision, practically speaking, to kill the game and make the draw rather than risking a loss. So this was the first game, very important. We drew the first game. Now let's move on to the second game. This was when I knew after this game that Wesley was definitely not sharp at the beginning of the match. So he goes e4, e5, knight to f3. Now I go knight to c6 here. He plays bishop to b5. I go knight f6, playing the Berlin defense once again. So Wesley plays d3. I go bishop to c5. Wesley plays c3. All pretty standard. If white castles here, there's this line knight d4, so that's primarily why you play c3 to stop knight d4. So I go d5. We trade. Bishop to c4 is played. Queen to d6 I play here. Wesley goes queen e2. This is all pretty standard, by the way, and here I played a move that's a little bit dubious. It's not actually the best move. I played this move bishop to e6. The correct move is to castle here. So I play bishop to e6, goes b4, play bishop to b6. Wesley plays bishop a3. This is actually a big mistake here, and amazingly what I did was 100% correct, because now I actually jettison a pawn. It looks very scary here, like if I trade on c4, white is threatening c5 to fork the queen or the bishop. Say I move the queen, c5 just flat out traps the bishop. There are no squares here, so I can't trade. Let's say I try to castle, then I lose because of b5. There's a discovered attack on the queen, and my knight on c6 is hanging. So I played e4 here. Wesley takes, trade on c4, and now I castle long. Wesley castles, and now I play knight e5. And the reason this is completely losing for white is because white can never really develop these three pieces. So after queen e2, we trade. I go queen e5 here, and you'll notice you'd love to get the knight out, but the knight can't go to d2. The pawn on c3 prevents it from developing. You cannot push a pawn here because then you lose the rook in the corner pocket, so it's very hard to develop. Additionally, the bishop on a3 is doing nothing, and the knight on b1 cannot jump into the game. So after queen to e5 here, white has problems developing the knight, the rook, and the bishop here on the queen side. So bishop to c1 is played by Wesley here, and now I play knight takes e4. And again, you'll notice that these three pieces cannot get into the game. The knight cannot come to d2. The bishop can kind of try to come into the game as Wesley does here, but it's very, very problematic simply because you have no play, and this bishop on b6 is really good targeting the g1 diagonal. So bishop to e3 is played here. Now I play rook to d3, and Wesley blunders with queen e2. Now oddly enough, I actually saw this position during the game, and I felt that Wesley might blunder queen e2. That being said, it's really, really bad for white here. I will answer that critical question later. I'll explain much more in depth what I mean by that, but we're doing pure analysis at the moment. All right, so he goes queen e2, and now I find the hammer blow with knight takes f2, and Wesley instantly resigns. If he tries to capture the knight or the bishop here, I just simply take the queen, and after bishop f2, I have rook d1, winning the game. So he can't really move the bishop. If he takes with the queen, I go bishop takes e3, and I win the queen anyway because of the pin. And if white tries rook takes f2, I can just go rook takes e3, followed by rook e1 checkmate next move. So everything is pretty much lost here for white. So Wesley resigns the second game, and with that we take a very big 1.5 lead in an 18 move game. All right, so we have an 18 move win in game 2, and I knew at this moment that I really needed to turn the heat up on Wesley and try to win as fast as possible. All right, so let's keep moving on. Let's move on to the next game we have here, which is the third game. So I'm ahead. Let's put it in context here. How do I mute my sound? 1 second. Sorry, let me mute this. I guess I'll just close it. That's an easier way. Okay. So again, I win the second game very, very quickly. And now in the third game, I have the white pieces. So now I play knight f3. Wesley plays c5. Now I play pawn to e4. Pawn to d6 is played here. So now I play bishop to b5 check. Bishop knight to d7, and now I castle here. So again, Wesley changes it up here by playing knight d7 rather than playing bishop to d7 here. So in this position, I was surprised because I guess Wesley felt after playing bishop d7 he wanted something a little bit more complicated. That's my best guess. Something that's not so straightforward. So he plays knight d7, and Wesley would stick with this throughout the entire match. And I felt that Wesley kind of, after getting off to this poor start, getting in a funk a little bit, he never really was able to dig himself out of this hole, and he kept playing this line, and he kept getting in trouble. So knight d7 is played, so now I castle here. Pawn to a6 is played, so now I play bishop d3, knight f6, c3, b5, and now I go bishop to c2, bishop to b7, and now I play d3 here. Again, in previous years, this player by Hikaru Nakamura would sometimes play rook e1 and a4. I think he had a lot of games against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with these very similar setups. But in this case, Hikaru felt like playing d3. Again, keeping these very simple, sort of Capablanca-esque, very basic, very simple opening styles, and going from there. So, okay, so I play d3. e6 is played here by Wesley. I go rook e1. Same concept, trying to play for d4, but I have the bishop on c2 here. The bishop to e7 is played, and now I go knight bd2. Wesley castles, and I play knight f1. Again, a very simple, very smooth opening approach. Just put the knight on g3 and play for d4 at all costs. So queen c7 is played by Wesley. Play pawn to d4. Again, build the big center here. Wesley plays rook c8. I go bishop d3. Now d5 is a move, trying to go for the same knight e4, but again, after knight g3 takes, I think I take with the h pawn, f takes maybe is playable. It feels like white has a lot of play here on the king side, and it's probably very hard to deal with for black. So instead, a5 is played by Wesley. So now I play knight to g3. Not bishop takes pawn, by the way, because if I take, black can simply take the pawn on e4 with bishop takes e4 here. So a5, I play knight to g3. b4 is played by Wesley, and now I play pawn to h3. So Wesley plays pawn to h6. Now I play queen to e2, and now bishop f8 is played. Again, pretty normal stuff. Create some lift here. Try to put the queen on e2 to avoid bishop a6. Maybe push e5, maybe push d5. So now I play pawn to e5 here, which is a big mistake, by the way. And I was very unsure during the game. I remember, like, I thought for I think 30 seconds on this move because I felt it was very, very double-edged, allowing Wesley to take my knight on f3 where I get these double pawns. Especially because I was ahead 1.5 half in the match. But I felt that if something goes wrong and I lose this game, this match is still squared and we're very early. But if I win this game, I really am taking it to Wesley right from the get-go. And so that's why I play this, even though, as you guys can tell, according to the valuation, black is minus 1.5 here. So it's a very committal decision, but the risk reward ratio in my mind was, if I win this game, I think I'm going to be coasting very, very much towards a victory. If I lose this game, it's still 1.5. We have a long way to go in the match. And of course, if it's draw, well, you know, score stays the same. So that's how I balanced this decision. Was that during the 30 seconds I was calculating, but then I also thought, well, you know, if it works, I'm probably going to win the match. I felt like I was 80% plus if I win this game, and I start out with a 2.5 out of 3 lead. Very similar, by the way, to the match against Ding, where I think the first game was a draw, I won the second game, third game was a draw, and I felt if I win that fourth game with the white pieces and I'm ahead by 2 clean points after 4 games, I probably would have had a much smoother match. But again, you know, who knows? It's all right. So I play e5. Wesley trades. I take. He goes c4. Very good move, by the way. First, very good move. I go bishop c2. Of course, he takes. He does not go knight d5 because after knight d5, I can play queen e4. Threatening a checkmate on h7, and after g6 I go queen to g4, and there's a lot of pressure here on the king side. So Wesley takes on f3, and now I cannot take with the queen because then I would lose the pawn on e5. So here I take with the pawn. Knight to d5 is played. I go bishop to d2, and again, very, very iffy position because I have double pawns, but I basically am trusting that because of this diagonal, I'll be able to win the game. So he plays rook a b8, go rook a b1. Wesley plays g6, good move. Now I play f4. Wesley plays knight c5, and this was actually also a sign how I knew Wesley was not completely there, because knight c5 is simply a blunder. It hangs the pawn on c4, and it kind of throws away any advantage black could have. So this is, once Wesley plays knight c5 and I go queen c4, I knew that I was never going to be in trouble in this game, and I felt very optimistic. So I take. Queen d8 is played. I go queen e2, and again, it's still not great. I have some weak pawns, but at the end of the day, I have an extra pawn, and I have the bishop pair as well. Very important that I have this bishop pair. So queen e2, b3 is played. So I take. Knight takes b3. Go bishop takes b3. Rook takes b3, and now I play knight to e4. Logical move. Bring the knight to the center of the board. Try to jump to d6 or f6 where it's overprotected by the pawn on e5. So rook to b8 is played, and now I play c4, correctly attacking the knight, trying to dislodge the knight so that I can put my knight on f6 on the next move. So here Wesley kind of goes insane. He decides, you know what, I'm worse, I'm struggling, I'm just going to sack with rook h3. And this is another sort of telltale sign, I would say, is that when I've played Wesley, he's always very solid. He very rarely does speculative sacrifices. He generally keeps it as solid as he can, and the fact that he did this already in the third game is that I knew that he was definitely something wasn't right. So I take the knight. He goes queen h4, trying to play for this rook h1 checkmate. Say I play a move like, I don't know, let's just say I go d6. He has rook h1, king g2, and queen h3 is checkmate here. Queen guards the rook, and the king cannot go anywhere. So after queen h4, I play knight to g3. Wesley plays bishop to c5. So now I play bishop to e3. Again, very important move. Black is threatening to capture the knight because of the pin. So I break the pin. And now Wesley plays rook b3, and very importantly, I play queen f3, the only winning move here, because if I take on c5, there's a very nasty idea with rook takes g3, f takes g3, and I think after rook g3, maybe this is the wrong order. Let me see. The computer says something else. No, it says takes. I guess after rook g3, if I go king f2, I get checkmated, check here, and mate. And if I go to f1, it's the same thing, just check and mate like this. So the only move I have to play here is queen to g2. So I go queen g2, he takes, I take, and he plays queen g4 check. And now after king f1, queen takes f4, maybe I can keep the game going with bishop f2, but after queen c4, rook e2, queen takes d5, I have 2 rooks and a bishop for the queen, but he has a lot of pawns here that can march down the board, and my king is kind of open with queen h1 threats. So instead I play queen f3, which is the best move. Wesley takes, I play rook bc1. Now if black tries to take on e3, I simply take with the rook, and after rook takes, queen takes, knight holds h1, and black's sort of running out of steam. He only has a rook and a queen here. So Wesley plays bishop b6, and now I play another very good move. I play rook c3. Maybe not the best computer move, but a very simple move that tries to simplify. First of all, I break all the pins on the third rank here. For example, it looks very scary. There's a pin. He has a d4 threat. So by playing rook c3, I break all the pins. I sort of overguard e3 and g3. And now it's really, really hard to play for black. In fact, it's actually just losing. So Wesley takes, and now I take. Important move. You do not play rook takes b3, because after rook takes b3, there's rook takes g3 check, and I cannot capture with the pawn because then my king's in check. And after queen g3, it's very, very bad for white. Actually, it's just losing. So instead, I play rook c takes e3, again keeping the knight on g3 protected. Plays rook takes b2. I play e6 here. Pawn takes pawn, and after rook takes e6, Wesley resigns. In view of the fact that his king is very open here, I have rook e8, rook e7. There's no actual checkmate here if he takes the knight. I do not take with the pawn, I take with the queen. And again, there's no way to coordinate any threats towards the king. And so I'm just threatening rook e8 and rook e7 to win the game. So after e6 takes rook takes e6, Wesley resigns the game, and I take it 2.5 to half lead in the match. And I sort of kept this lead going throughout the 5+1. And so we're going to move to the 3+1 portion now. Very important moment. At this point in the match, I was ahead by 3 points. I just started off by winning the very first game of the 3+1 portion. I won the 5+1 where I was up 2 games. So I won the first game, and this was the second game of the 3+1 with me leading by 3 points. So knight f3 c5 is played. I play e4. d6 is played here. I go bishop to b5, and now knight d7 played again by Wesley. Now I castle. a6, bishop to d3. Pretty standard setup. We play this exact same opening, which we play throughout the match here. Bishop e7, knight d2, queen c7, knight f1, castles, knight g3. Again, playing this whole match in honor of Dusan Popovich and his whole setup with this knight f1 g3, because he played against me all those many years ago on ICC and Play Chess. So a5 is played. I go bishop to f4 here. Rook fc8 played by Wesley. The idea again is to take the pawn. Say I play just a random move like h3. After pawn takes pawn, I cannot recapture with the pawn because then my bishop would be hanging on c2. So instead I play e5 here. Wesley plays knight d5. Now I trade on d6, and I go knight to e4 here. Now in a later game, I actually in the final game of Bullet, I played the line that actually is winning here for white, which is I took, and after king h7, knight g5, king to g8, I played queen h5, queen f4, and then I played queen h7, king f8, and the hammer, rook takes e6, threatening checkmate in 1 because the king cannot come out. And after pawn takes, knight takes, forking the king and the queen. Wesley played king f7. We trade. I played queen f5 check, winning the knight, and I would go on to win the final Bullet game. But actually during this game, I didn't realize it worked. So I play knight to e4 here. Wesley plays queen e7. I go knight queen to d3, threatening to try and take the pawn. Say black plays a move like, I don't know, b4. I have knight takes c5, attacking the bishop, but also creating a discovered attack towards the pawn on h7 here. So c4 was played. Now I go queen to d2. Wesley plays b4, and now I go knight to e5. Now it's important to note that the knight on d5 is really well placed, trying to put pressure on the c3 pawn. What I have to do is with this pawn on d4, I need to try to get a knight to c5, or additionally a knight to d6. So for example, say black plays a move like bishop a6, I trade, and now the pawn supports this knight going to c5. And here, if black trades the knights, I take, and now I get an outpost on d6 for my knight as well. So after knight e5, Wesley plays knight f6, and now I go knight to g5. Very vicious move, creating a lot of pressure towards the pawns on h7 and f7. If black trades the knights on e5, after pawn takes knight, I attack the knight. Knight has to move, and now I just take the pawn on h7, and once again, it's completely winning. So rook f8 is played here by Wesley. Play knight takes c4, just gobble the free juicer. Wesley plays h6. I go back to e4. We trade here, and now Wesley plays the move that objectively is not that bad, but when Wesley played it, he started shaking his head. I saw it on the camera, which is he played rook to c8. Because now after knight takes a5, I'm simply up 2 pawns on the queen side. Mind you, it's still not that clear, but I am ahead by 2 pawns. So Wesley trades, queen a3, attacking the pawn and the knight here, classic right triangle. Go knight b3, pawn guards knight, no attack on c3. Knight takes e4 is played. I play rook takes e4, Wesley plays knight f6. Now I go rook e3, rook c4, play rook g3, trying to play queen takes h6 because of the pin. Additionally, if black plays knight e4, forking the queen and the rook, I very simply can go queen to e2, attacking both the knight and the rook at the same time. So instead, Wesley plays king h8. Now I go rook e1 to stop knight e4. Wesley plays rook a8, attacking the pawn on a2. How often am I looking at the camera? Not super often. I would say that at the critical moments, I will look very briefly because I don't actually have to tab out or anything. I just have it up in the right-hand corner of the screen. So I can just look right up very briefly when there's a critical moment. So it's not that often, but at critical moments, I will look. So, okay, so rook a8, I go rook e2, guard the pawn on a2 here. Now Wesley plays rook a4, trying to capture this pawn. Of course, he's triple stacked, legendary triple on the a file. Now I play queen to d1. Wesley plays queen d6, go queen to b1. And here Wesley missed another big opportunity to sort of try to claw back in the match. He has queen a6 here, again, lining up the legendary triple, also creating the classic 90-degree right triangle, of course, as well, because the rook and the pawn are both under attack. Instead, Wesley plays queen d5, forgetting his right triangles. I play rook to e3. Wesley plays queen to c4. Now I go rook c2. Wesley plays rook a3. Again, white is up 2 pawns, but it's very hard because all the pawns are a little bit loose. If I ever lose a2, the knight is no longer stable on b3. Also, knight d5, and then the c3 pawn might be a little bit weak as well. So I play h3 here. Wesley plays knight to d5. So now I play rook to f3. Wesley goes king g8. And now I play knight to d2. Wesley plays queen a4. Again, keeping a lot of pressure and tension on the board. Now here I played c4, and I actually thought during the game that after c4 I was winning. If you look at the cameras and the reaction I had, you'll see that for a second I thought that it was kind of over, and then Wesley found rook a2, and I realized it was still very much a game. So now we trade on a2. We take on d5, he takes on d2. Someone asked, do you just see the opponent's camera or the commentators too? No, the commentators are in a separate Zoom call, so when the match ends, they bring us into the Zoom call with the commentators, but during the match, we don't see that. It's just, I just see Wesley's first camera and second camera, and he sees my first and second, and that's it. So queen d2, I go queen b7 here, attacking the rook on a8 and the pawn on f7, again, creating my own 90-degree right triangle here. So Wesley goes rook f8, guarding. I take on e6, and this is where Wesley missed. This was really where he missed kind of the real opportunity to make the draw, which is after queen e1 check. I have to go king h2, and he can take, and this should be a draw because he keeps the pawns connected here. Instead, Wesley takes with the pawn. I trade. I go here. I check, and it's very hard to win this, but pawns are a little bit split here, and I am simply up a pawn. So Wesley checks. I go here, queen b3, play h4, keep slowly trying to push the pawns up on the king side here. Check. I go here, queen b2. Bunch of repetitions occur here. Both players a little bit low on time. I go here, I check, and again, now I push the pawn to h5 with the idea of playing queen to g6 check and winning the pawn on g7. Now, to his credit here, Wesley played king f7 instantly, and at the time, I thought after h5 I was going to win the game because I did not see he had this king f7 move, which holds right away. So we found this immediately. Play queen f4, king e7. We play a little bit of a dance again. I go queen d7, stop the queen d5 checks. If he can get queen d5 and hit the king and the pawn on d4, it's a classic sunray, and black will be able to draw very easily. So I go queen d7, queen a8, go here. Wesley plays queen f3. And now I play queen to e8. It's not the best move here, but it's a very slippery move after queen e8, because after Wesley checks and takes the pawn, you think, well, okay, queen g6, king e7, queen guards the pawn, everything's safe. It's a very easy position to hold the draw. But very much in the spirit of playing like El Magneto here, I find one last little wrinkle in the position. I play queen f8, king g5, not king e5, by the way, because then I take the pawn on g7 and I will win the game. Goes here. And now I play queen to f7. And again, it looks like black is out of the danger zone here because he can just go queen f6, and white doesn't have any real mating threats. With f4, you just go to f5 or even to g4. So here I play queen to e8. e5 is played by Wesley. And by the way, this I think is a critical mistake. I felt it in this position. I think it was king g. Yeah, it was king g4. I thought if he went king g4, I wasn't actually sure what I was going to do here because I can't really make the check because then he takes the pawn on h5. And I also can't push the pawn because he will just take it with the queen. And I was very concerned about this at the time. But Wesley plays e5 instead. And now after f3, it gets really tricky to play, especially with only 3 seconds on the clock. Because after queen d6, we do a little bit of repetition. I go here and I go to d7, and it's very hard to figure out because I'm threatening to play mate in 1. If you take the pawn, queen g4 is checkmate. If you play queen f5, I take the pawn, king h5, and then I fork the king and the queen. And so it's extremely difficult to play. And the only way to hold here is queen f8, which Wesley correctly finds. I go queen to e6, trying to be sneaky here, threaten the mate on g6. If you go queen f6, I go queen g4 mate. But Wesley finds queen f5, only move here. We do more dancing. I play queen d7, queen f8, and now I go check here, queen e4. And this is where Wesley blunders. In this position, he still, I think, only has 2 moves that draw. I think queen e8 and queen f7 are the 2 moves that draw, but with only 3 seconds on the clock, Wesley plays queen d6, the crucial blunder. And now after queen g6 check, he loses the game, because after king e7, I take the pawn, goes back, and I just play queen g8, and then I go queen g7, tickle, and then I go king h3, slowly trying to bring the king up. Eventually this will be winning, because I also have the idea of playing queen g6 check to trade off the queens. So I end up winning this game, and I move ahead by 4 games. So after this win in the 3+1, I really never felt there was doubt in the match, but we are going to take one last look at a critical game from the 1+1, because prior to the match, as you guys know, I was doing a I was doing a Botez Gambit speed run. And jokingly, my chat said, well, you got to make sure to sack a queen against Wesley tomorrow in your match if you have the chance. So we go through this game. This is a modern defense. This was 3 games from the end, by the way, so the match was very much decided at this point, but we'll just get to the critical moment. The game is pretty normal here, nothing too crazy. I'm a little bit better, actually maybe more than a little bit better at a critical moment, but we'll keep going. So Wesley hangs a knight by accident. He plays bishop e6, he hangs the knight. As you guys see, this is +4. So Wesley goes knight b4, and I realized during the game that of course I could just take the knight, and after bishop b3 I can just trade, and probably queen a5 is winning, even something simple like bishop e3 is winning. Everything wins here, but I figure, you know what, because of the conversation that I had with chat yesterday, I figure, you know what, I gotta go for it. And I thought maybe I had a chance here to even not just lose on the spot, because black has a very bad bishop here. It's walled in, doesn't really have any scope, and the knight is also stuck on the rim. Unfortunately, Wesley plays this quite well. He goes g5, plays king f7, and now he sees knight b8, which I overlooked. I sack, he goes here, not king g6, by the way, because after takes queen e5, I can take the bishop, and if you take with the king, I have bishop d4 to win the queen, and if you take with the queen, I can go rook takes b8, and again, probably still winning for black, but very complicated. So instead, Wesley plays king g8, I take on e6, he plays queen c8, I take, and I go e6, and the rest of the game is pretty straightforward. Wesley does not fail to convert this, wins it pretty smoothly. We just get to this moment, play h4, knight to e5, and now it's just game over. There's queen f3, there's queen g4, there's nothing I can really do here to prevent losing the game. So I lost this game, but fortunately it didn't matter in terms of the outcome of the match. We end up winning by a final score of 23-8. So just, to give some general impressions on the match before we wrap up this analysis for YouTube, I would say that overall, when Wesley started off slowly and I got the big advantage, and when I really put him under pressure in the first couple of games, that set the tone for the entire match. So it set the tone for the entire match, and I would say maybe in 3+1, maybe it's some chance in 3+1, like the first game, to maybe make it close. But it really, I felt like once the 5+1 portion ended and I was ahead by 2 points, I don't think Wesley ever really had a chance. So it was a very good match. There's one other game which I would like to there's one other game which I'm going to point out as well, because you guys mentioned it, and it was also a match which showed how well I was calculating. So give me 1 second, because you guys mentioned there was one other game which was just absurd. I found this crazy draw. Let me see if I can find the bishop c2 game. Let's see. It was in the 3+1. I'm trying to see if I can dig it up. It was this one, I think. Let me see if this is the right one. No, that's not the right one. Where was it? I think it was this one. Yeah, okay, we're gonna take a look. Yeah, we have one more game. Give me 1 second. Let me reload the page, and let's load the PGN. Okay, one more game that we're gonna take a brief look at, because I had forgotten about. It's an important game as well. This was a game where it was just a sign of how well I was calculating. So knight f3 d5 is played, e3 knight f6, c4 e6, b3 b6, bishop b2, bishop b7, all very standard again. a6 trade, bishop d6. Now Wesley plays bishop to d3 here. Play knight bd7, castles, rook to c1, rook e8. Not going to go through this super in depth, you guys, but we're going to get to a critical moment. All very normal. Black is the knight in the center, maybe f5 to overprotect. Queen e2, we trade. I go here, here. And let me get to the critical moment. So again, this is also another game where Wesley had chances to win. Plays queen d2. I actually overlooked that he could take on e4 and go for the c4 d6. Again, bishop is kind of blockaded on the diagonal, so there's no obvious threat for white. But again, my king is a little bit weak on the back rank. I also have some soft pawns on b6 and a6 here. So I play a5 to stop queen b4. And now this is sort of another example of where Wesley, I could tell he couldn't really find the rhythm, because if Wesley was on, he would have played queen e2 with the idea of queen to b5 here, and I think he probably would have won this game. Instead, Wesley plays bishop a3, which now allows me b5 and b4 to close the diagonal. The bishop's going to have to go back home to b2 and be on another bad diagonal. So he goes here, I go b4, he goes back, but again, no access points. Pawns are now very solid on a5, b4, and it's only slightly better for white. Maybe not even better, actually. Computer says equal. So I play rook b8, try to stop the infiltration with queen b5, goes g4, play a4, king h2, we trade, I go rook a2, plays king g3. Now I play rook f8, rook c2, and I take the pawn. This is a very committal move here because it does allow white to chuck another pawn, but he opens up the long diagonal here for the bishop. So it's very committal that I allowed this. I wasn't happy afterwards that I allowed it, but I made it work. So I take, goes here, play queen e6. Wesley plays queen b5, trying to infiltrate with queen b7, trying to put a lot of pressure on this diagonal, and it looks really, really bad for black here. So I played bishop d1, which, again, I don't know if it was the right move, but during the game I thought it looks fancy schmancy and it should be okay here because I attack the pawn. If he takes the bishop, I just take his bishop back and I have queen e5 check and I'm fine. So it just looked like a nice fancy schmancy computer move, so I just played it. So he goes queen b7, I take, he goes here, and now I think it was in this moment when, I don't know if it was after Wesley played queen b, I think it was right here Wesley thought for like 30 seconds, and it was while he was thinking here for queen b7 that I saw this crazy draw line with takes here, queen h5, king g1, and now I play this crazy move, rook takes b2. Now again, computer says bishop b3 is a draw, but allowing rook g7, king h8, and with this diagonal and queen e7 and all kinds of scary stuff happening here, it's hard to play. Apparently queen e7 I can go what, rook c8, and the reason this is okay is because if white takes, I can throw in a check and then I can mate with rook c1. King has no escape score on h2. Again, allowing all kinds of disasters like rook h7, g8, g6, very, very hard to do. But I saw another fancy schmancy way to play, which is rook takes b2. So now after rook takes b2, I go bishop c2. And white does not have a queen d5 check, so my queen would capture. That would be a clean Botez gambit. And white has no way really to stop this repetition, creating the right triangle between d1, h5, and then also g5 and g2 as well. So here after bishop c2, Wesley took the bishop. Now an example of why this isn't good, or why bishop c2 is so strong, is because after f3 I can now go b3 and put the rook on b2 in jail forever. The bishop guards the pawn, and the pawn also guards the bishop, so the rook has no squares. The rook is just stuck in jail here by the bishop and the pawn, and so now there are never going to be any threats with the queen and the rook here because I just guard the h7 pawn with my queen. So that's also why it's such a brilliant move, and why Wesley had to sack, or not sack, but make the draw, because if he doesn't do that, he goes f3 b3, it's like, whoops, your rook is actually not playing in the game anymore here. So Wesley takes, and then we make the draw here. I just keep checking, and now I make the check, and of course after king g1 I just yo-yo between h5 g5 and d1 and h5, and it's a very simple draw. So this was also an example of how well I was calculating that even if there were other ways to draw, I found one of the most beautiful draws here with this bishop c2 move. And so I definitely feel that today I was on form. I was definitely playing really, really high quality chess, I felt, throughout the match. So anyway, we do win the match 23-8, and it's a great result. And so that's the analysis we're going to do. I am going to talk just very briefly about one other topic, the topic everyone wants to ask me about. So I was talking about my preparation yesterday, and I was talking about how I played a little bit of bullet on Lichess. So I'm going to put this in context. So one of the big things that I did very poorly against Ding Liren in my match is I felt that I was moving super fast throughout that match. Like, and there was one game early in the 3+1 where I lost the game in like 30 moves, and I had 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and Ding had 30 seconds. Very, very bad game. And so when I refer to like doing preparation or what that was, the way that I felt is, and I'm sure this is psychological, it's no different than say when you play tennis. It's like saying, you know, it's like Roger Federer playing on the really fast courts at the US Open or Australia in the past. They slowed them down, obviously, as we know, which is probably why he doesn't have more majors. But to put it in context, there probably is no big difference in terms of the actual times that happen in the game. But what I felt is that I feel like when I played a little bit of Bold on Lichess, I felt that when I was making the moves, less time was being used. So I felt that if I could translate that to where I'm making the moves and it feels like less time is being used, then chess.com is going to be the same amount of time, but it's going to be a lot slower, and I'll be able to budget my time better. So that's exactly what I'm referring to when you guys ask me about being faster. I think they're objectively, I think they're probably the exact same. They're the exact same. But I felt that what that does is that I feel like I have more time when I'm playing on chess.com, even though I think they're the exact same in reality. So you know, that's your drama for all the people who want the drama. It's actually not drama. But that's how I feel.